Very warm good afternoon to one and all who have joined us today from across the locations. On behalf of Mentor My Board, ICS Divya Momaya, founder, welcome you all, the esteemed mentors panelists, for our first one of its kind mentor roundtable. Mentor My Board, in its short span and remarkable journey of 3 years, has achieved various milestones. MMB has trained more than 200 directors, promoters, founders, aspiring directors, senior management executives, and professionals. Has organized 40 plus boardroom talks, and so many of you have been already part of our boardroom talk series. We have conducted 6 plus mastery certification programs, monthly roundtable meets, coffee table meets. Independent Directors Summit was there in 2020, which was attended by more than 250 participants. With an ambition of growing 1 lakh directors by 2027, Team Mentor My Board is looking forward to build synergies among the industry stalwarts in its mission of creating a platform to groom the next generation of leadership. Time has passed when industry was talking about Gen X, Gen Y. We are on the crossroads where corporates are now looking at the millennials to take up the next leadership. As millennial generation grows in the workforce and baby boomers retire, managers and human resource professionals, we need to develop new engagement models, taking into account the generational differences between the baby boomers and the millennials. Deloitte Global Millennial Survey 2020 reveals that despite the individual's challenges and the personal resources of anxiety and millennials and the Gen X, which they are facing, they have remained focused larger on the societal issues, both before and after the onset of pandemic. If anything, the pandemic has reinforced that desire into them. And the corporates are thus on the crossroads where the millennials are set to take up the leadership positions. The boardroom dynamics are going to change with these millennials coming up in the forefront of businesses and decision making. These millennial boardrooms, especially when emerging economies like India, where 50% of the population is going to be below 25 years of age and 65% of the population is below 35 years of age, requires continuous mentoring, handholding, training in terms of adopting best industry practices. With intention of grooming these next generation boards, MMB has gathered today the senior professionals, board leaders, and industry stalwarts like you all from across industries. I'm sure today our panel discussion and the mentors' insights will surely have a strong takeaway in terms of shaping these millennial boards. All of you mentors and leaders here are the experts in your fields, areas, and industries. You have been running your own communities, consulting, and even the organizations where you have been positively impacting lives of entrepreneurs, business owners, and even millennial startups. Today, we are talking of nurturing boards of Indian corporate world. Let me give you brief statistics. India has close to 6.5 crore SMEs and MSMEs, whereas the businesses registered under the corporate structure, corporate status is approximately 14 lakhs. That's very close to 2%. Now let's see the number of listed entities which are listed on BSE, which is close to 6,000 listed entities, and on National Stock Exchange, which is close to around 2,000. The total number, including the startups, SMEs registered, does not exceed 8,000. That is 0.5% of those registered corporates. Now, when India is standing on the rise of the decade, waiting to write the enormous growth story, this dream cannot be achieved until the brains behind this ever-growing corporate world of India are nurtured and mentored and groomed well. As well as any corporate run through its brain, that is the top directors, handholding these boards collectively becomes the responsibility of the mentors like you. So I'm sure you would agree to this. Now, without wasting much of the time, I really hand over to Neha to introduce our panelists today. And with this brief introduction, I'm sure we will have a rocking panel discussion on the topic of how we mentor and nurture the millennial boards and the challenges of the SMEs and MSMEs. So over to you, Neha, for the introduction, and welcome all the mentors, all the panelists, and everyone here. Thank you so much. Over to you, Neha.
Thank you so much. So let me first, wish everyone a good evening now. And I will start with the introduction of speakers of our first Mentors Roundtable event, our panelists. I will start with Mr. Sridhar Ramchandran. Mr. Sridhar Ramchandran is a turnaround strategy specialist and comes with an over 30 years of significant experience in general and financial turnaround management of companies across Asia and Africa. Currently, he serves as Chief Investment Officer of India Nivesh Renaissance Fund, a first turnaround fund in India catering to small and medium companies. He represents his fund as a nominee director in listed and unlisted companies. He has held leadership positions in different roles. His first book, End of Samba Dance, a business and financial thriller fiction, quickly rose to popularity in the business and financial community. He is a regular columnist on Economic Times and often quoted by various business journals and speaks in various industry forums. Sridhar sir is qualified chartered accountant, a cost accountant, CPA from Colorado State, USA, and a commerce graduate. So we welcome you, Sridhar sir, for this first Mentors Roundtable.
Thank you very much.
Our next panelist is Mr. Sunil Deshmoor. He is a C-suite executive with global experience, startup advising, mentoring, leadership, consulting, and coaching. Mr. Sunil Deshmoor has a global experience in career spanning 3 decades. He has well-rounded experience in business management, from developing business strategies to managing operations to providing board-level oversight and governance. He is a global board member, Institute of Management Accounts, IMA USA. Mr. Sunil served as CEO, Infrastructure Group and New Business Initiatives at AM International Holdings Private Limited, Singapore. He was Managing Director at Wilson Cables Private Limited, also member of Board of Directors at Sikagan India Limited and Sikal Logistics Limited. He is a qualified management accountant with certifications from USA and India and a fellow member of the Institute of Company Secretaries of India. He has completed an advanced management and leadership program from the said business school, University of Oxford, UK, as well as an executive seminar on leadership from the Aspen Institute, USA. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Neha. Hello, everybody. Nice meeting you.
Our next panelist is Mr. Ralph Ward. Mr. Ralph Ward is an internationally recognized speaker, writer, and advisor on the role of boards of directors, how benchmark boards excel, setting personal boardroom goals, and the future of governance worldwide. Mr. Ward is publisher of the online newsletter Boardroom Insider, the worldwide source of practical first-hand advice on better boards and directors. He also edits the Corporate Board magazine, the nation's leading corporate governance journal, with corporate subscribers around the US and 27 foreign countries. He is an author of 5 acclaimed books on board and governance for today's corporate boards. Mr. Ralph has a wide media appearance and serves on several advisory and non-profit boards. Welcome, sir.
Good day. I'm looking forward to talking with everyone.
Great. Also to mention, Mr. Ralph has joined us from Canada, and it's 6:30 a.m. in the morning out there. So thank you so much for that, sir. Our next panelist, in fact, our moderator for today's discussion would be Mr. Robin Banerjee. Mr. Robin Banerjee is the Managing Director of Caprahans India Limited. Earlier, he has served in several multinational global corporations in senior leadership positions. Academically, Mr. Robin is a CA, cost accountant, and a company secretary. He is the recipient of several business awards. He is the chairman of Confederation of Indian Industry, Western India, for Finance and Taxation Committee for 2021. He is a member of Board of Studies for Independent Directors, IICA. Robin had earlier authored 3 books on indirect taxation, including one on MODVAT, which went into 10 editions. He has recently authored 2 best-selling business non-fiction books titled Who Cheats and How, and Who Blunders and How. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Over to you for this discussion, sir.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored to be the moderator for one of the finest panelists, which perhaps Divya and her team could ever arrange together. And we are talking about the Indian boards. We are talking about the millennials. We are talking about how to shape the new board, especially for the millennials, which are perhaps aged between 25 and 40 years. So having said that, I would, because of lack of time, we have about 30 minutes together, and there's so many speakers, lovely speakers, so much of knowledge which we have together. We will structure it on a question-answer manner. And broadly speaking, we will focus on 3 broad categories. The first one is, what is the problem with the boards today? Why do we still get frauds coming out from wherever it is? Why is it coming out? That's one little bit we will focus on. The second piece I will try to focus on is, what about the millennials? Do they have any role to play? Can they make things different? And what's the future for them? And the third one I would like to talk about, essentially speaking, is mentoring. Because essentially, if we can mentor ourselves, we can train ourselves, we can train the next generation, I suppose we'll have a better India, better world, in fact, in front of us. So in order to build my first question, I sometimes wonder that when there are companies which has fantastic boards, why still there are frauds which comes out of the closet? Why is it that the board could not figure it out? And why is it, what goes wrong in the boardroom when the dirty linens are then washed in the open? I would first request, before I, of course, ask Sunil and Sridhar to perhaps give the Indian context, and of course, Ralph, the global context, just 2 or 3 examples which I read recently, not recently, even for a long time, all of you are aware. But let's look at perhaps the worst example of corporate business fraud is Kingfisher Airlines, where the owner ran away with the money. When I look at the board constituents, who were the board members, among them, one was the famous tennis star, Vijay Amritraj. You may or may not be aware. And if you are from India, another very famous person in India was once upon a time the SEBI, the market regulator chairperson. He was the chairman, Mr. G.N. Bajpai. Now, when the ex-SEBI chairman and such person like Vijay Amritraj is in the board, why did Kingfisher fraud take place? And when Ralph comes in, Ralph, I would also like to ask you that you may not be aware of the Indian example as to what I just cited, but when I look at the Wirecard fraud, suddenly for last 10, 12 years, $2 billion missing, hole in the balance sheet. And when I go to the names of the board, I see fantastic names. So what went wrong? So my question to perhaps Sunil, if you could start with, and then Sridhar, what do you think goes wrong with the board when such experiences we face?
Thank you, Robin. Very interesting question and very pertinent in today's world. I remember a scenario or a real life case when I was appointed on one of the listed companies board in India. And I joined the board and I was immediately asked to head the audit committee, being a finance background originally from, and which I accepted. But every single other member in the board started laughing at me, because in past there was not a single audit committee chair who lasted for more than 6 months. So I didn't know this because I was a new board member and I was very excited. And when I became an audit committee chair, and in first board meeting, I found out there was a fraud. And all board members were hand in glove. And it was a very, very, very difficult situation for me. So I went to the promoter or the chairman, a family-owned business owner. And I told him, you called me on this board for XYZ purpose. So now it's the time, either you change your entire management, right from your CEO to your CFO to a company, everyone was involved, or I'm going to resign. So this promoter became very angry with me. And he said, I will talk to you after 48 hours. And after 48 hours, he said, you sack whosoever you want to sack. And I sacked 5 people, CEO, CFO, company secretary, GM, finance and legal, and chief marketing officer. The crux of the story is if the board members are not given enough power to go and talk to the promoters or to the board members who have appointed them, that position is of no use. So independence of board member and the ability of the board member to persuade to the committee or to the chair that it is necessary that compliance governance is a requirement not because of legal provisions and law, but is also a requirement for your company and your business to grow. So when I convinced that chairman, I didn't convince only from compliance and legal point of view. I said, this is happening in your company, God knows how long. And if you don't change this, you are never going to change this. I'm the only person who will come and go. But you will have to carry this legacy lifelong. It's your grandfather's business. You take a call whether you want to continue or not. So I would say independence of directors, their ability to convince and persuade the chairman or the board committee or the audit committee, and eventually taking a physical action, just not convincing, you have to physically take an action and see that changes happen. So I would say that could be my answer in a brief. And yeah, thanks.
Sunil, very well said. Let's hear what Sridhar has to say on this.
Hi, thank you, Robin. It's whenever we open the stock market, when in the morning, which companies of your portfolio has gone down by 20%, which is the lower price band. Suddenly you find the auditor has resigned. These are things which you take Vakrange, you take a few cases that have come in the last 1 year, and you find the one of the issues that, in fact, I have comprehensively dealt with this governance issue in my book, The End of Samba Dance. Whenever you get time, you can read this. So this where how a $5 billion company can go down the drain. I think I will list out 3 important factors here. When I met Dr. Mervyn King in South Africa, who was the corporate governance legend in South Africa, who brought in Judge Mervyn King, he said, Sridhar, the governance is not in some legal statute. It should come from your heart. Now, if your heart is weak and whatever you try to do, you can hoodwink any system. It does not matter what SEBI comes up with guidelines and all of that. So I think fundamental reason is your intention has been compromised. Number one. I mean, there are good promoters who have come successfully, but after a particular period of time, when the dream, what they wanted to achieve, crosses that line into greediness, the governance starts failing. This is number one. Number two is you are very proud to have very accomplished people on the board of directors as independent directors. And most of the time, they are not given the right information on time. And more importantly, the independent directors also have not been able to spend time, meaningful time with the management. That is my second issue. They all come the last minute, spend a half an hour, of course, their own preoccupations. In fact, you mentioned Mr. G.N. Bajpai. In fact, he is my chairman of my board in my fund. And I have asked him what went wrong in Kingfisher. And I have also consulted Kingfisher way back in 2009 and 10 when I was in consulting. The arrogance was one of the important factors that led to the downfall. It's not that they could not take action. They could have taken action, but arrogance took over. So that's number two. The independent directors are not in a position to do what they were supposed to do. Of course, this is likely to change in the thing. Third factor is risk management. This risk management, I don't think half the boards in India ever discuss, forget quarterly board meetings. Even in the annual meetings, they don't even discuss what are the risks that our businesses are confronting. So I realized when I came from Hong Kong in 2008 into one of the listed companies as the CEO, within 3 months, the company was in doldrums and the money was squandered away, right? So these are classic examples of 3 examples which I have given could be one of the main reasons that these frauds continue to happen. Thank you.
Sridhar, very well said. I think both of you gave fantastic views as to what's perhaps happening in the Indian board, but maybe we can summarize the issue after we hear Ralph. Ralph, you are representing the globe. Actually, outside India, you're representing today for us. And we all know everything started perhaps collapse, sometimes in Enron, WorldCom, then Sarbanes-Oxley, things started changing, laws after charges started changing. Suddenly we find the German fintech company again coming up with a huge $2 billion hole in the balance sheet. So what's going wrong? What's your view? What's happening internationally?
One of the issues that I have seen repeatedly on corporate governance failure, it goes back to the basic structure of the board of directors itself. This is something that always amazes me, that some corporate structure of a group of people who are supposedly somewhat independent but interested in the organization meeting irregularly to review things goes back several hundred years to joint stock companies. When we look at the situations, when we look at the amount of oversight that is required, you realize the board of directors is one of the most ineffective ways of monitoring things that we could possibly imagine. It was never designed to have a hands-on involvement and monitoring of things, so it's very difficult to object when it does fail at this. And in several of the cases that are cited, we had this in the United States with the Theranos scandal recently here. Some of the most eminent people in our country were on the board of this organization, and they didn't realize the entire thing was simply a bubble, completely built on fraud, because you have a board of directors structure that isn't really able to monitor such things. In fact, I would say the more eminent experienced people that you have on the board of directors, you almost guarantee these are people who will not have the time and the mind share to ask the questions, to look at the information that they're dealing with here. I think one aspect that will help change this, and it's something that we're discussing here today, is a rising generation of younger directors, Generation X, but also the next one, Generation Z, which is going to be almost 500 million people in India alone, are coming in, and we're going to see the changes that we've had in the last year with the technical structure of the board of directors. Getting a group of eminent people together around a table every quarter to look at results is giving way to an online form of governance with constant information flow, better dashboards of information, real-time monitoring. And you're also going to have these younger people who are going to be more willing to pop up and say, wait, this doesn't look right. They don't know how things always have been in the governance world, how our group in the boardroom always works together. They ask impolite, improper questions because they think that's the way it's supposed to be done. And I think that's going to give them a great amount of strength going forward.
Thank you, Ralph. I think we got a very nice overview as to what's perhaps going wrong, with Sunil saying most of the independent directors are actually most dependent, because if they don't listen to the chairperson, they are gone from one day to another. So is there independence in the independent directors? Sridhar, you rightly mentioned the word greed. I think that's really the overarching comment. Time spent by the directors are, of course, not adequate, especially independent directors. And of course, I love your concept of risk management. If risk is not taken care of, how does the company suffer, company survive? In fact, to my mind, just to give an example for everyone, why ILFS, which is one of the most foregoing and famous NBFC companies in India, went bust. They did not have a risk management meeting for 3 years. We will not believe it. And what they were doing, the concept was they were borrowing short and lending long. And any risk management, any person, even of a class 12 nature, a child who understands risk, will say, how can you borrow short and lend long? And that's why, rest is history. Forget about all the frauds they committed. And having said, Ralph, as you rightly mentioned, the board structure itself is perhaps defective. And I think going back to Sridhar's point, MIS, Management Information System, is also inadequate. So thank you so much. If I can change the gear a little bit, because so much to discuss, you guys have so much of experiences. I would like to take the next topic, because that's a topic of the day actually about millennials. So millennials are essentially, as it stands today, are someone who are aged between 25 and 40, having said that, more or less, it's the 30s is what we are talking about. And two questions I have here. One, and if all of you, a short comment, all of you could make, starting from Sunil as usual, then Sridhar and Ralph. Of course, next time we will do it the other way around. If you could kindly explain to us that what do you think the millennials can do? Will any change take place? And are millennials being encouraged today to join boards and make a contribution to this world? Sunil, if you could.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. Yeah, one is obviously we all know millennials are the people who are born between 1981 to 1996. I am a baby boomer, and Divya made a comment, baby boomers are going to retire. I don't want to retire so early. Anyway, according to me, the most important aspect of millennials is millennials are going to bring in a different perspective to the boardroom. Things like disruption, technological change management, the entire different way of governance at the board level, which will use technology as a platform. So these are some of the things which millennials will bring, but obviously, according to me, we need to train, we need to mentor the millennials to be able to sit on a board. And I always make this comment at a board or in a boardroom, the culture is the most important, or I always use the terminology called cultural competence of the board. So the culture of the board has to be welcoming to the millennials. Obviously, you cannot have an entire board made up of millennials. You will have mix and match, some baby boomers, some millennials, and all those things. So the creation of a culture or culture of competence, I always use this terminology, which Peter Drucker said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. You may have the best strategy in the world, but if you do not have a right board culture, what are you going to do with the millennials or any board members? So I'm very, very positive as far as bringing millennials on the boards are concerned. And we need to teach them things like emotional intelligence, which is very important because a board consists of functional expertise as well as technological expertise, but you also need to understand emotional intelligence, which is a very, very important part as far as the board member or in getting entry into the board is concerned. And obviously, we need to mentor them. There is concepts like shadow boarding or bringing millennials on an executive committee, invite them for the board meeting. But I'm very positive. I am sitting on some tech startups board, and 3 of them are millennials. The perspective they bring, I would have never thought in this way what they are thinking today. Their entire classification or analysis of market is so different than what we baby boomers think in a different way. So I would say it's a welcoming step. Obviously, there will be a intermediate, there will be a time of transition between the baby boomers to the millennials, but I'm very positive about that. Thank you.
Sridhar, taking it forward, what Sunil is saying, and you are a startup expert, you do a lot of work on that. Do you think it works? Do you think the startups are encouraging millennials? In fact, most of the startups are by millennials, in my view, nowadays.
Yeah, I think today the startups are actually they are leapfrogging. Let's be very clear. Our governance and our even our senior boards today, they have all evolved over a period of 50, 60 years coming into India post-independence. Now the millennials in the last 10 years are leapfrogging. Let's accept the fact. There is no doubt about it. And even if you see why Lehman collapsed, by the time the product of a young MBA coming out of pedigree top 5 universities, when they get into the market with a new product, by the time the board understands the risk, by the time the damage is done. So what does it mean? Basically, the millennials need a hand-holding, and they are not waiting for a yearly performance reviews. Let's be very clear. They are wanting today, what have I done? Have I done it right? And can you coach me? They don't want this hierarchical method, and they are looking forward immediate constant feedback, appreciation, and not yearly and the quarterly performances. Now, this is where they want to be challenged, inspired, and valued. Now, if you, we always call aspirational India, aspirational younger generation. If we do not recognize this, then we are having a major problem. And Sunil, very clearly said we need to create shadow boards also. That's very, very important. Now, today, if you take Indian Premier League, the cricket matches which are happening, every year we are finding 3 to 4 stars. You know, who is behind these 3-4 stars? The coaches who have spent phenomenal amount of time with these people, telling them the technique, how to do this, how to do that. And that's something which we have to recognize this, and it should be brought into the corporate culture. Now, yesterday, one of my young team members, whom I have been with him, he has been with me for many years. A couple of years back, he had a very terminal operation going on. He said he did not want to go into an operation theater until I went and saw him before the theater. Now, what does it mean? He thinks you are like his guru. You have, there is no relationship of boss and subordinate and all of that. But he feels even in his personal life, you get involved, and that is what inspires him. And he is today successful, continues to be successful. Yesterday, I got a WhatsApp message from a Jakarta Indonesian friend who contacted me after 24 years. Sir, I'm doing a great business. And I realized in 94, 96, I worked with you. I learned all your discipline. And that's why I am successful. I mean, I have lost touch with this guy 24 years later. So I think by nature, the millennials are seeking emotional support, the hand-holding, all of that. We have to recognize, we have to go down to the level. Like my son, during lockdown, I have two boys. We work out at home. And I taught them games and how to work out. My 14-year-old boy says, Dad, your posture is wrong. You do this, you do that. Now, what we call in terminology, reverse mentoring. Now, this is what is happening today. I think these are my comments when it comes to millennials. Millennials need support, but don't force them with mentoring and leadership, and don't give them too many jargons. Just be with them, spend your day with them, and you will get to know a lot more things are happening. One guy who came to mentor 5 years back, he is a third-year engineering student from a very, very low middle-class family. His family pushed him to do engineering, but he was very creative, wanting to stop the engineering, get into that product making and all that. And after he spent 15 minutes with him, nothing to do with the mentoring, nothing. He started crying. Then he came out openly, sir, you opened my eyes. I said, your father is so poor, he wants you to be an engineer. And if you leave in the last year of your engineering, your vision can continue to be there. I'm not saying you should not have a vision. You will not believe this guy finished his engineering and he continued with his product making and he's successful. So I think it's a mix of lot of things, but give them emotional support, the understanding that they need. Thank you, Robin.
In fact, both Sunil and Sridhar brought a fantastic issue of EQ, emotional. While Sridhar is talking about emotional support, Sunil is talking about emotional quotient, and both this together can definitely change the corporate world. Let's hear what Ralph has to say. What's happening, Ralph, there in terms of millennials? And what's your thought?
I think some very good points have been made here, and this is something that is happening in India, but in also much of the rest of the world when it comes to economic growth, is that we have two very different versions of governance of our corporations. We have the fairly traditional structures that we know of the boardroom, of founders, of promoters, and then also in much of the world, state-related industries. It tends to be fairly large, it tends to be well established, it can be a little bit sclerotic in its operations and its growth. And then we have the people like the millennials who are driving the startup world and are establishing their companies with governance needs. And I think this shows the value and need for mentoring for these young organizations. We're all familiar worldwide with young unicorn industries that have started up with millennial age founders. We have them here in China, certainly in every nation of the world. Young technology companies are finding new opportunities with data, with technology that were not even considered possible or even considered at all 10 years ago here. I'm a bit concerned that some of the unicorn companies that do have millennial founders, millennial promoters and funders are outgrowing their governance, and it can be a real problem. We saw this in the West over the last 20 or 30 years. You would have a small boys club of funders, venture capitalist investors, and founders who were the board of directors of this enterprise. Suddenly you have multi-billion-dollar companies, but they still have the same leadership in the boardroom at the top, a small boys club of people who are trading with each other, young people, and they don't know much in the way of market discipline yet. And that's where I think there's a real concern, because these companies have to evolve their governance or they get into trouble. Some of the companies here in the States, Amazon, Facebook, other ones have found themselves facing very difficult questions. They have young founders who consider themselves masters of the universe because they've created this monstrous amount of wealth with something in a short period of time. Many of the traditional governance mechanisms that we associate with the board, effective committees, good oversight, independent board leadership, are things that, well, they simply haven't grown into that yet. And it's causing them some pain. It's jumping to light speed for their companies here. Their governance and their board structures haven't grown up yet. And I think that's a very critical phase with millennial related companies, getting in there, putting in the proper board mechanisms and the proper governance, and getting founders to appreciate we have to deal with this, because if we don't, then our investors, our government, our regulators are going to force us to.
Ralph, you made a fantastic comment. You know, I sometimes wonder what happened to the wonderful company called WeWork. And WeWork is a classic example how a youngster, 32 years of age, just damaged the organization forever, perhaps. And very sad. And as you rightly mentioned, perhaps the governance is leaving behind, and they are running ahead. And that, to my mind, brings to us the third block, which we want to discuss today, is mentoring, which is handholding. How is it that we can make these millennials, and even they are non-millennials, doesn't matter whether it's Generation X or Generation Y, to my mind, everyone is mentorable, including you and me. There is nothing, never ever we can stop learning, never ever can we stop following someone who is doing something great, something good, something better than me. So having said that, let's turn it around a little bit. Maybe Ralph, I can ask you the question first, that what, you know, there are some questions, and I believe there are some questions from the people who are on this call, or on this web. Essentially speaking, they're all saying that how is it that we can handhold the next generation? Most of the time they feel that we, the so-called Generation X's or whatever, maybe the baby boomers, we do not handhold them. So could you please kindly help the youngsters as to how they should get into mentor, how they can take help from mentors, and how we can get to mentor them. Both ways it should work. Any thoughts on this, Ralph, and how we can make it work?
Right now, and over the last year, I've seen an odd inflection point coming worldwide with governance, and it's shaking up things in ways we're not seeing here. Over the last year, the traditional board of directors meeting that all of us grew up with have established over the decades, of a group of worthies getting together every 2 to 3 months quarterly around a board table, going through a huge pile of information just before the board meeting. That model has been exploded because of the pandemic. The fact that we're having a Zoom conference right now instead of gathering face-to-face is one example of that. Boards around the world have had to deal with that, and it's advanced the way boards work in an incredible pace. Things that would have taken years of technological change have suddenly been forced upon us. And I think that's a very great benefit for millennials and for boards overall, for a way to teach them. Our generation, older generation, is used to having to sit together face-to-face around a table and do governance. Now we're having to do it remotely, but that's also changing the way that our board meetings are structured. Instead of having hours, days set aside for the board meeting, here is a distinct block. It's being done piece by piece. A committee meeting here, a small group is spinning off into a Zoom meeting here. We'll meet for 15 minutes, half an hour, and a couple of days later, we'll have another one here. It's easier to schedule. It's much more convenient. It's a free-floating sort of drip feed approach to governance. Millennials are used to dealing with that. Our older generation of board members, perhaps not so much so. So it's a case where the millennials have been able to hold the hands of the older generation of board members in teaching them how to deal with this. This is how you manage to break off into a meeting. Here's how you read people's faces and body language remotely. So that's something that they're able to teach us here, and it's changing the overall way boards are functioning. And I think that's going to help governance in the long term, because we're blowing up all of these assumptions of how things had to be done here. Millennials, for their part, are learning that these are things that they have to take seriously now in the boardroom here, and how to deal with this when it comes to governance that they may not have had to study before here. We can't simply have a quick chat in the boardroom, decide something, and then move on. All of the legalities that have been required of governance, good minuting, proper procedure, things that we can prove in court later, we made this decision legally and properly, you still have to attend to that. And millennials are getting the discipline of that. Oh, well, we have to make sure we write everything down, keep a record of everything, keep track of our communications. I think looking forward to the last year, blowing up the boardroom and getting directors out of the boardroom, we're going to really start to appreciate what a change that brought for all generations in the boardroom.
Thanks, Ralph. Very well commented. A lot of ideas you have given. Sunil, if I may move on, how do you think the mentoring should work? And you have so much of experience, what's happening all around, including the so-called startups and millennials. How do you think this mentoring should work? Because there seems to be voices coming from there that said, I am not being mentored and I'm not getting the right mentors.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. Very interesting question. Just for information, I am the Associate Dean of the Mentoring Program of the Institute of Management Accountants of USA Worldwide. And I have been recently appointed on their board because of my contribution to the mentoring program.
We have had a better person answering this question on a mentor by my board program of the year.
I hope my mentors have mentored me properly to answer this question. So I obviously 80% of my mentoring happens to the millennials. I'm a firm believer that no management school, no MBA degree, no management executive development program will teach you what mentors can teach you. You know, you can go to the classroom and learn something, but mentors can teach you the life experiences, and they can change your life completely. Now, when I mentor somebody or any person, there are 2 or 3 things which are very important, which I personally see is trust. Whether there is a trust between a mentor and mentee. If the mentor and mentees are not able to create a trust, you can't mentor someone. It's just impossible. Mentoring is not a ticket to sell. No, it's not like a product to sell. It's an experience. You are creating someone's life. So trust and respect is very, very important in mentoring. And I first work on the trust with anyone who comes to me. And I decide within first 45 minutes, we call a 0 meeting or a 0-hour meeting, whether we can work with each other or not. So trust from both sides, not only from my side, also from the mentee side or my client side. That's very important. Second important aspect is the guy or the person to whom you are going to mentor, is he coachable? Whether he has got a mental ability to get coached, or whether you can persuade him to get coached. And is he a disciplined guy to work with you maybe for 3 sittings, 5 sittings, 10, I don't know how many sittings. So very important. Mentoring is not a fly-by-night business. It's a long-term business. I have got 3 mentors in my life in the last 3 decades, and I still work with them. Unfortunately, one of them is no more. But 2 of them, I still work with them. One of them is 83 years old, and one of them is 65 years old. I still work with them. Once you marry with someone as a mentor, according to me, it's a lifelong marriage. So consistency and continuity needs to be seen. Most important third aspect when you mentor a millennial or a young man or women, how do you handle their curiosity? If a mentor is not able to manage or handle the curiosity of a mentee, he is not a good mentor according to me. So the type of people whom you are going to mentor going forward, the millennials, they have tremendous amount of curiosity. And a mentor has got tremendous amount of experience. Now, how you match the experience versus the curiosity? We tend to say that, oh, I have done this like in my past job. I've done this in Indonesia. I've done this in Singapore. But that's your experience. Curiosity is beyond experience. And the subtle difference between experience and curiosity, which always I tell is, experience gives you feedback, whereas curiosity gives you feed forward. And to a millennial, you need to give not a feedback, you need to give feed forward. If you are able to handle these three things with a millennial or any client of yours or any mentee for that matter, trust, persuasion, curiosity, I would say that that relationship is perfect or is going to last longer. And that's
yes, fantastic. I think all of us over here would have got a lot of value out of this. Sridhar, your thoughts? How do we become a better? How do we get a better mentor? I think that's where the challenge is.
Yeah, good. I think, Robin, you raised an important point. The millennial saying that I'm not getting a mentor. See, in our Hindu mythology, if you all remember, the moment you are ready to seek, the guru will appear. You know, this is the very important thing that I would like to say. And what is that you are seeking? That is the most important. Define what are you seeking and talk to 2, 3, 5 people and identify. Don't stick to one mentor. See, one mentor cannot shape you everything. Identify 2 or 3 at the max. To the extent, exploit them. I am using the word exploit them because your objective is to get the best. How Dronacharya was exploited by people to learn the tricks out of him. Beyond which, move on to the next mentor, because nothing comes permanently in life. You have certain requirements in business which keep changing. So I am talking not only millennials, I am sitting on some of the SME boards and all that. Now, the chairman should identify within the board of directors, every year one should be selected as a mentor and give that responsibility to them. And I create an openness environment, because in a board meeting, what is first fundamental issue? You are not open. You are not discussing the critical issues. Number 2, listen and create the time for follow-up. Now, minutes of the meetings are circulated, action taken, report is done, but nobody follows up. Okay, go ahead, right? The 3rd, give constructive advice and suggestion. I will tell you, whether it is a SME board, a large board, or a millennial board, they will respect this and go forward. These are the small points when it comes to the board side.
All 3 of you made such lovely points. You seek, you get. You know, there is a wonderful book called The Secret, and perhaps it has sold some more than 1 million copies, which nothing else says the same thing. You want and you get. So I think mentor-mentee goes that way. To my mind, if you really need a mentor, you will get. He or she will appear in front of you. We have run out of time, of our scheduled time. Maybe we can quickly get.
Robin, could I make one point here?
Of course, Ralph, of course.
I would not talk to. I very much enjoyed the points that Sunil and Sridhar made, and I would put that into one other aspect of the board structure for corporate governance, particularly for larger established corporations, that mentoring becomes most effective when it's institutionalized. And most boards around the world, I have found, do a fairly poor job of board succession planning. How does our talent look on the board? Are we evaluating our talent on the board? What will we need 4, 5, 10 years down the road to keep this company going forward? Who is retiring? Who is going to be coming into the board of directors? And that becomes a wonderful board mentoring opportunity if you put together that succession plan, because you can start developing a sort of shadow junior league board of prospects of people. Here are people who we are looking at perhaps she or he is not at a point in their career when they can be a strong, valid board member today. But with their development in their careers several years down the road, they could become a very good board prospect. All right, let's identify those people, and then let's pair them with mentors from our current board to help grow them into the position, a sort of board junior league, if you will, for the next generation of the board of directors. Don't leave it to chance. Institutionalize it in this way, and in the long-term company, it's very beneficial.
Excellent comments. I think most of the questions which are getting raised and written on the right-hand side, I can see, are getting answered. Quick question I have to all three of you. What is that one thing you would want to change to make boards more effective? What is that one thing would you like to change to make boards effective? I turn it around maybe in some way and say, okay, Sridhar, go ahead.
Good. If the board gets their intention right.
Very good. Excellent.
I think that's one sentence will cover everything, which will fall into governance and all of that. I think that will be my short answer.
Excellent. I wish I knew the answer before asking the question. Sunil, what's your take on that? Sridhar says intent.
Culture of performance.
What is it?
Culture of performance.
Culture. Oh, wow. What an answer. Culture. That is really one word each. Ralph, what's your take on it? What do we need to change?
I would say it is information and communication to the board of directors, making sure that they increasingly have real-time monitoring of financial results, of reports from governance, of any whistleblower systems here. For so long, everything a board of directors has seen has tended to be a great big book of information before the quarterly board meeting. If there was a problem, it was already something that had been going on for months. If they're having almost like a hospital constantly monitoring a vitals aspect, which we can do with technology now, it becomes impossible for individual directors to ignore a problem. It's something that's right in front of them, even on their computer screens constantly.
I must say, three grand words came out from this last question. One is intent. If you have an intent, you can make it happen, which is very close to what Sridhar said earlier. If you seek, you get it. Culture, Sunil, wonderful. And no question about it. It actually tilts everything. That's called perhaps a tipping point. And Ralph says MIS, information, appropriate information on time and approach transparently and accurately. Thank you so much. I think we really run out of time now, 10 minutes beyond our schedule. I think we have answered most of the questions we got on the chat box, unless I'm missing out on anything. Divya, is there anything we are missing out? I will be happy to conclude that way. Over to you, Divya.